She patrolled through the ocean, feeling quite relieved that her friend was all right. The bioluminescent whale-like creature greeted her in kind with a low, somber bellow. They swam circles around each other until they each went their separate ways, not too far away, still able to communicate with each other across the depths of the ocean. After hearing what her friend had been through, Red was irate. When would they get peace? This world used to be so peaceful. Of course, they had their skirmishes, her with other creatures of the sea, but for the most part, they were left alone, and things were much easier when they were smaller. Her parents and those of the other creatures had lived deep under the earth. They were lucky enough to not have to have dealt with all these bothersome manifestations. Red also came from a time where ships were not as prevalent on the sea. Only recently did the creatures of the sea start to fight back. Red, now a full-grown adult, has her own territory handed down many generations in her family. She had been suffering a long time. She used to have friends, till all of them were slowly hunted or driven away. Even the other monsters of the sea had started to mistrust each other, thinking if they opened up their territories to them that they would somehow lead the humans to their families. Red has never felt more disconnected to her community than now. Every time she thought of those human creatures on their big ships and boats, rage filled her heart. Today was going to be a calming day. It was already night, not like it mattered in the very deep parts of the ocean where light cannot penetrate. She had to completely navigate using sound. Red could hold her breath up to 24 hours, and the older she got, the easier it became. She remembers a time where she could only hold her breath for an hour. Not surprising that she and many of the other sea creatures have this adaptation. They've had to stay away from the surface as much as possible. The ones that have gills have it the easiest. Good for them, she thought to herself, before rolling her cetacean body over so her backs can scratch against the seabed on these very smooth and then jagged rocks. The transition from the smooth surfaces of these specific rocks to the sharp ones made her feel as though she was having many sensations at the same time. Certain parts of the ocean bed gave her different experiences, like being caressed by her family members, being sheltered by them at an earlier time in her life, when they would use their bodies to put up against hers to keep her safe and stable. She remembers her mother and father, and all his other wives, and her siblings, or half-siblings, many of which that had long since been erased from the earth. The next morning, Red made her way steadily and casually to the surface. The seagulls were waiting for her. She always wondered how they managed to find her so fast, how they were able to track most of the monsters. She marveled at the creatures, wishing that she could fly just the way they could. She knew what they wanted, and she would give it to them. She loved helping other organisms, and so she quickly swam for miles until she found a shoal of fish. Using her enormous body to circle around the school, she packed the fish so tightly until they had no place to go but up to the surface, and as they did, the flock of seagulls quickly dove, each of them grabbing an individual fish, some of the fish too big for the seagulls to properly carry off. As Red was looking up into the sky at the seagulls with her yellow eyes and her striped pupils, she heard a call quickly to her left. She turned her large head, in eagerness recognizing the call of her friend, Green Snapper. They called one to the other. He was many miles away, but they were able to have a conversation as if they were right next to each other. Red had such good hearing that she could even make out what he had for breakfast, the way that he was digesting it. His belly, too, made these low rumbles. They swam side by side, parallel to each other, separated by many miles of water and distance. The green snapper, in his way of communicating, garrulously asked Red if she were going to come to the get-together for all the other sea beasts. In recent years, the creatures in Red's and Snapper's immediate community had tried to band together to form an alliance or some sort of bond with one another. After all, no matter the species, they were all being hunted. It's as though their existence was invalidated, probably because the things hunting them saw them as a threat, with them being the same size or bigger. And so Red understood the need for the monsters to naturally band together, especially in the past when certain species would not necessarily have anything to do with each other. Red thought that they were delaying the inevitable. They were going to make many new friends and then lose them soon anyway. And was it also a good idea to have so many of the sea beasts collected in one area under the sea? No matter what excuse she came up with, Green Snapper would always invite her and implore her to come. Every year he asks her the same question. Red always figured that Snapper liked her, and she liked him too. She wasn't ready just yet to get close to anyone. She'd lost her whole family, and at some point, according to Snapper, she was going to have to get over it, to honor them by moving on and forming new bonds. After all, from his family, all the offspring weren't meant to survive anyway. Her parents would have been proud that she was still alive. All these encouragements that Snapper gave her didn't make her feel any more encouraged to go and spend so much time cramped in with hundreds of other sea creatures. She communicated to him that it was going to be a hard pass for her. He didn't have to say anything, but the silence in between his responses made her know that he was quite disappointed. Every year after that, he would be disappointed, and she thought to herself that maybe one year she'd say yes, not because she actually wanted to go, but for him. She was growing quite fond of him, in an annoying sort of way. Suddenly, there were clicking noises. They were coming from Green Snapper. Red asked him if he needed any help. Excitedly, he turned her down, and basically placed a bet. There was a ship in the distance, one of those stupid hunter humans. He could tell by the way the ship sounded, and the cacophony coming from the ship due to its vibrations of the people talking on board. Most of the sea beasts had become good at recognizing humans on their ships. It was time for a bet, and Green Snapper supposed that if he were to take down the ship in a certain amount of time, then Red could not refuse him and she would have to go this year with him, even if she only stays for a day. Red did not agree to anything, but she smiled inwardly, loving the attention she was getting, and knowing that he would not give up. He really was a true friend. Snapper didn't need a reply. Her silence was all he needed to go. Guns a-blazing with his long tail and tentacles on his underbelly, he sped towards the ship. As he said, and as was to be expected, he quickly tore it apart, something that Red was very excited for him for. He was celebrating. "Now, you see? Now will you come with me?" he seemed to ask. Red rolled her eyes. He couldn't see her, and she was many miles away, but the sound of her body, or the waves that were coming off the vibrations of her mass, confirmed to Green Snapper that he had won the bet, and she would honor it, and finally go with him to the get-together. It was going to be so annoying, and this made Green Snapper feel elated. They turned direction so they would both meet up together to head towards the sea fiesta. They started talking about something else. They began to sing songs that they had rehearsed to each other, and they would make tunes together, their voices blending in perfectly to create a mellifluous melody. Suddenly it was interrupted. Red wondered why he would stop at a time like this. They were both vibing. It was nice. But something was wrong. Red stopped swimming and pointed her body in the direction miles away where she knew her friend was. Green Snapper was not responding, and when he did let out a weird sound, she recognized what it meant. Fear. Fear of what? Was it the other sea beast? The large purple and black one? Everyone had known how to stay clear of that thing. That thing was 10 times the size of each of them put together. The thing was so large and ominous that for the longest while, throughout the tales told by sea beasts, it was said that this specific creature was part of the earth because of how large he was, that he might have even made up the foundation or one of the corners of their world. Green Snapper didn't let Red wait for long, and told her that it was a ship, but not just any ship. The ship. The inevitable. The ship that has killed more monsters than any other ship ever. In Red's world, it was called the Insatiable Carnivore. She always wondered how something above water could be so deadly. The ships were the only creatures that she's ever known to sit on the surface as though they were completely vulnerable, only to reveal that they weren't, and it was quite the other way around. Being close to them meant almost certain death. Red pleaded for her and Snapper to flee, but feeling as though he needed to impress Red further, he decided to take on the ship. He's never fought it before. A bright red small light rises into the sky, a flare set off by the humans. Snapper careens towards it. Red roars as loud as she can and starts swimming towards his location as fast as she can possibly go, urging him to stop and not to do this. By the time she reaches within a mile, it's too late. Her friend's body is sinking to the bottom. She calls out to him, and the only reason she was able to hear him was because she could sense the pressure from the water, and she could also hear the sound, the deep, beautiful rhythm of his heart slowing down. Red looked up to the surface with narrowed eyes, with hate towards that ship. She could either kill it, put it out of its misery once and for all. Maybe she was the last of her kind. Maybe she had no more family members. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction. She was scared of that ship as well, and even if she had gone up there to confront it, that would not help her friend. If anything, it would put her in danger as well. She dove to go and catch Snapper. Before she could catch him, his body softly hit the seabed. And with that, his heart stopped beating, only small moments before Red could reach him. Red softly nuzzled her friend. She mourned over him, knowing she would never get to say goodbye, that she would never sing with him again, that they would never go to the fiesta. The only time she decided that she would open up and get close to this one person is the time when he is taken away from her, just like her family. Enough was enough. She surfaced hours later and found the ship. It was calling to her like an anglerfish in the depths of the dark sea, wanting her to come, but she didn't care. This time she would answer the call, and she attacked the ship. Unfortunately, she had no experience really fighting ships, but more so avoiding them, and quickly she became enraptured in its tentacles. She tried to break free, and she was terrified of pulling it below the ocean. She knew that if this awful creature, if this ship had gone below the surface of the water, it would quickly fill up and become an anchor that would keep her tied up on the bottom, unable to go up and get air when she needed to. She had known of several of the sea beasts that have died that way, thinking they had defeated the ship, only to be either crushed by it, captured by it, and later drowned by it. The fact that this creature could be easily drowned, but yet still take your life as it is already dead, scared her. And so, she tried to find a way to take herself out of the tentacles, but there was nothing she could do. Having tried to go around the back end to try and see if she could catch the ship creature unawares, she had inadvertently created a whirlpool. As the tentacles became wrapped around her neck, she tried to stay under the surface to avoid being eaten or bitten by the creature, and she saw its eyes, its ugly face of a creature that she'd never seen before, with lifeless eyes and a face made of wood, staring back at her, or not staring at all. She felt a little looseness in the tentacles. Looking through the film of water's surface, she saw a very small human with very fuzzy hair cutting the tentacles. Another human was behind her, a much larger human that was probably her mother or father. Before Red could blink, she was cut and she was completely free and able to get away, and she quickly dove. She stopped diving only moments after she started because she heard something fall into the water and quickly turned to see if they were coming after her. But as she looked, it was those two humans. They were helping each other. Did they jump in after her? Did they want to come with her? Or did they fall in by accident? She looked at them, observing them very quietly, until they turned around and looked at her. She was terrified. She could end them right now if she needed to. They've helped her, and she wondered why this was. She hated humans and they hated her. Why would they help? What was different about them? They did nothing but stare at her and just floated there, like jellyfish with 4 tentacles. And then she quietly backed up and sank into the darkness, still watching them from the dark, but at a distance that she knew they were not going to be able to see her. If there's anything she's learned about these ship monsters and their crews, is that they were not very good at seeing in the water. They entered a small boat and were just standing in the water. Red wondered why, what was taking them so long. And then she realized what was happening. The creatures that were still on the ship were turning against the ones that had helped her. Of course they were. They were the enemy, and for some reason, these humans were not. There were good humans. Red had known that there were good humans, but she's been burned so many times that she just thought it's safer to not trust any of them. But seeing how they were willing to risk their lives to save her, it made her intrigued. Or were they saving themselves? She's never seen hunters ever set any of them free. She decided that she would return the favor. At least nobody would owe anyone, and she quickly gulped them up and protected them as she watched one of the humans point their little weapons at them. The one that fired those nasty stinging bites. Red then dove back down into the water. The creatures still inside her. When Red had made it to the shore of the island, she ended up sneezing the humans out. They were very annoying. The large one, probably trying to protect its offspring, kept trying to attack her, and it was so pitiful seeing this creature, smaller than her eyeball, try to attack her. She sent some water in his direction, and that's all that was needed to put him onto his back, and then she went to go and rest. She figured the humans would make themselves at home, and they sure did, until she had to rescue them from Klubok. Klubok was a large crab-like creature, and he tried to eat them. It wasn't his fault, but she had talked to him only moments before, expressing her feelings about leaving the humans alone. For some reason, that only made him want to eat them more. "I was just going to taste them and then bring them back up. Or did you think I was going to eat them completely?" he said, in his scrubby crustacean way of speaking. This only irated Red, and she quickly put him in his place. Days after, Red had become accustomed to the humans, and they had bonded with each other. Even the parent of the offspring was growing on her, and she had learned to like him too. When she carried them back to an island where they wanted to go, she figured they would say their farewells. She had more than owed them, even though it was their family that had been trying to hunt her first, and took the life of her friend. But as she was about to leave, she recognized the ship. This ship had the same shiny apparatuses on it in the coast that those large cannons did. Cannons, that's it. Those things were cannons. Dozens and dozens of cannons that lined a whole side of the ship. She knew exactly what that was for. That was for killing more of her friends and her kind. She would not let that happen. She would stop it before it got to that. She could hear her newfound human friends calling out to her. They didn't want her to. Of course they didn't. Whose side were they on anyway? She decided she was going to get rid of them. The humans didn't know what it was like. She had carried them to the depths, where they were able to see her world through the openings in her nasal passageways. She could hear them talking about it and marveling at it. She wonders if any of them had ever been that deep. She had showed them the graveyard with all her friends' bones, and that of many families and individuals that she had known or not known, just lying at the bottom of the ocean, cut down before a lot of their primes. And now here was one of those things that wanted to kill more of them. She would never let it leave into the ocean again. She could see those same humans on the land with those large weapons. She implored them to stop, and they attacked. In that moment, all she saw was Red. All she remembered were her countless friends and family members who had been taken away, who had unjustly been slain. All Red could see was rage, and she charged for the ships, killing most of them that were already on the ground and in those stupid tiny boats that they thought, naively, were strong enough to withstand her large mass. She towered over them like a bleeding mountain. She felt another stinging sensation from behind her. She looked back up on the shore, fearing that her new friends were in trouble, fearing that one of these evil enemy men had gotten to them. Imagine her surprise when she turned around and found that it was the bigger human who was holding one of those weapons. This made Red confused, because she could have sworn that he wanted peace with her. They were getting along so great. Now, because he's seen his friends, he wants to show off? She still can't bring herself to hurt him. After all, he did save her life. He must know that that little weapon would not hurt her, or would not do any damage. Growling at him, She asks him in her way what his problem is and why he's doing this, and that he needs to get away, him and the little one. Even before she goes up on shore to intimidate him, she can sense his anger and distress. Where was the little one, the cute human? On the floor, on the ground next to him, lying lifelessly. She's always liked the little human, the offspring of the larger one. The parent was okay, but he was definitely not as fun and very, very full of himself. But when Red saw the little human curled up in the sand, she felt something break inside. All at once, flashes of her memory quickly inundated the forefront of her mind, her heart breaking 2 times over again. And she remembers her children, her son and her daughter who had been with her, who were mercilessly slain, one of them having been gutted, at a time that doesn't seem that long ago. Red painfully closed her eyes, not wanting the memories to come back. She had all but forgotten that she even had offspring at one point. And it was for a good reason, too. Seeing the little human curled up on the ground, she remembered all over again what it felt like to see her children lying lifelessly in the water. There was the red flare. She was pretty sure that the humans were the cause of the little human being hurt. Enough was enough. She should have done this a long time ago. And she saw exactly what she expected to in the horizon. The ship with all the cannons that she had surely destroyed and broken in half had called backup. And it was the inevitable. The notorious ship responsible for taking so many sea beasts' lives. She charged straight for it. In her heart and memories, she heard Green Snapper's songs, her best friend, and many other of her comrades who she had grown up with. Green Snapper was innocent, and one of the most beautiful personalities she's ever met. He did not deserve that death. She was going to kill the lead human if it ended her life. But something horrible happened. As she dove below, ready to sail into the ship and blast it to smithereens with her momentum and her body mass, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. Immediately, she couldn't move. Her muscles tensed up. Her eyes rolled in the back of her head. She flipped her tail around until it was hard to move it. As most sea beasts are naturally buoyant, she floated on the surface, just lying there helplessly and paralyzed, her eyes seeing the lead human with his fat neck staring down at her. She wanted to bite his head off of his shoulders, but she was unable to move anything except for her eyes. She helplessly just lay there floating on the surface of the water as she felt the humans tie her body tightly, wrapped up so she couldn't move. She thought about Green Snapper. His body had been covered in armor. Maybe he had still been alive like she was. It's possible that he probably wasn't even dead. Until he probably drowned in distress. No, that couldn't be it. She couldn't force herself to think this way. She needed to survive. She needed to concentrate on surviving. Where were her friends? Were those humans ever really her friends? Somewhere close by, due to the vibrations in a little boat, she could hear the distress of her friends. She could hear the distress of the fading baby human named Maisie. By the time Red woke up, she was in a glorious place, filled with humans. She could smell them at every turn. It was a toxic odor. Everything looked so unnatural here. These big, icy, spiky structures sticking from out of the water. She still couldn't move as she watched more humans than she's ever seen in one place, staring at her. And then she heard a little voice. A very familiar voice. It was the little tiny human, Maisie. She was trying to free her. She was trying to cut the ropes from around her like she did before. Why was this little human so hell-bent on saving her life? She was convinced that this was probably a different species of human. She was definitely a lot kinder than the others. Then she heard a cacophonous uproar. 2 humans fighting on top of her body. Couldn't they pick another place to do that? But even her stupor, still floating on the water's surface all tied up, she knew that it was a large human that she'd made friends with that was trying to help her from the fatneck human. He had every intention of killing her. Suddenly there was a snap, and Red found herself rolling in the water, submerging herself momentarily. She was drowsy and completely out of it. This poison that was coursing through her body was still very potent, and it made her feel as though she had no control over her body, as though she was looking at herself from the outside in, wondering who that big red creature was, just sitting in the water helplessly like a flailing fish that had been battered by too many waves on the surface. Red wanted to retaliate, but every time she rose to attack, her head started swimming. She couldn't focus her vision. She knew that the humans were taking out their cannons and aiming them at her. She had to do something, but she was so confused. However, her confusion suddenly snapped her back into the present as she saw the fatneck human fleeing for his life on that icy structure. She rose above him having nowhere to go. This was it. She could see his eyes. She was enraptured by the look of terror and fear on his face. He would suffer for everything that he put her family through and all of his people. But Red never got her revenge. A little figure stepped out in front of her, and she could hear the figure calling out her name, or saying something to her. Whatever it was, Red knows that the little figure wanted to get her attention. It was Maisie, little human. Her parent came and stood next to her, and took up the harpoon, the one that the statue had been holding, that the fatneck human was about to use, and he broke it in front of her. No more hunting, is what she thought he probably was saying. He had no intention of hurting her. He destroyed the weapon that was responsible for killing so many of her kind. He really was her friend. Red let her human friends onto her head. She looked down at the fatneck human, who didn't have any interest, it seemed, in hurting her. That's fine by Red. She never wanted to fight anyway. She wanted to live in peace as her parents always had. She allows her friends to say something. She can't understand all of human, but she absolutely knows that the little human and her parent are telling all of the humans who are now lining up in countless crowds that Red is good, and that hunting her and her kind should stop. Who knew that this little human would be the leader of all these other humans? Maybe she was royalty, just like Red's family had been. Just like Red was technically, before most of her kind was hunted to near extinction. Had all of this not been in the equation, Red would have been sitting by the side of a male, ruling a certain territory under the sea. She was the last living heir of her family line, of the regal line. She never wanted to be a queen anyway, but knowing that her family was gone, and that things were never going to be the same, that it was every beast for themselves, Red only cared about living the rest of her life in peace and silence. And that's exactly what she got. After Red dropped off her friends and said a forlorn goodbye to them, she headed for the open sea. This time, no ships were pursuing, no one was shooting at her, and she didn't know if all the humans would honor what her friends had said. But one thing she did know is that times were changing, and she would hope that someday soon, just like before, a time would come where the humans would leave them alone. Where Red could possibly, maybe, gather the courage to go to a fiesta. Maybe share her life with someone, and once again, have some offspring. As Red took her breath, the last breath she would take for a long while, she dove through the depths of the water, feeling the water cool her sides. Her back had been burnt by the sun. She had to protect her friends, and they couldn't stay underwater for long periods of time, so she was forced to stay on the surface, not able to wet her back. It was a sacrifice she was happy to make in order to protect her new friends, who have saved her life and those of other sea beasts more times than they could ever imagine. In the future, many of the sea beasts would notice the humans start to fight amongst themselves, some still wanting to take out the sea beasts, and others fighting those ones, trying to protect them and defend them. Red dove down, and she saw the bioluminescent whale, the dark blue creature with the glowing white stripes all over her body that looked like a skeletal system, circled around her in joy, welcoming her home. Red was happy to see her as well. She looked into her eyes and sang. "Boy, do I have a story to tell you," she seemed to say, as both of the creatures swam side by side, off into the murky and mysterious depths of the ocean.